Yeah, well, I think Dr. Van Spall did covered a wonderful breadth of concerns there, and so and for both speakers, I don't know that I have so much to add in terms of I mean, new concepts, but just a few things that I think about when I hear. So first of all, yeah, don't review for your friends. Except for unless your friend is the person who is going to give you the very best review possible. My friends don't want me reviewing their papers, and I guess that's probably a little bit unique. But it's very true. One of the things I struggle with as an editor-in-chief is finding reviews, and people often recommend people that you take it. Sometimes you have to fall back on these recommended reviews because you're having such a hard time finding them. And you know, it might take you a month to find a single reviewer, and then you send it to a recommended reviewer. And I swear I've had this happen. I've had a review come back within 15 minutes that says simply accept. And you know, clearly I'm not going to use that review, right? And so you know, if you're going to scam people, you should probably do a little bit better job on the scam. But the point being, you know, the purpose of the peer review and the purpose of submitting a paper is not to get the paper accepted, right, or rejected. The purpose of it is collegiality. I mean, we're all working on this stuff together, especially in medicine. I think more than other fields that I work in, it's very important that the stuff that gets into the literature is actually helpful practice. It's not about vanity. And so, you know, if you see something that is coming through, you should want it to be as good as it possibly can be. And you as a reviewer have this opportunity to give kind of a different take on maybe the interpretation. It's okay to suggest different ways of analyzing things. And it's also okay if you're not an expert on everything, as long as you disclose to people, this is my ability, right? This is where I am. I'm not a methodologist. I'm not a statistician. I only know of this. I mean, that can be very, very, very useful to me as an editor. It can be very useful to the person who's writing on the other side. We often forget when we're reviewing papers that the person who's writing the paper might be trying to enter into an arena. Maybe they're junior. Maybe they're a non-clinician trying to apply their craft in a clinical area. And they might not know things that you know, and they might be fully willing to adjust their papers according to your advice, and just we're not aware of it. So it's not helpful as a non-clinician to hear clinicians say, you don't understand healthcare at all, right? That's not helpful. Help me understand healthcare. Help me understand the challenges that you deal with. I'm gonna disagree slightly with a massive caveat about the don't promote your own work as a reviewer. Absolutely, don't offer suggestions of your work for simply self promotion. But I do think it's okay for you to provide reference to your work if your work is the most appropriate work for making the argument. And this is actually part of a bigger discussion about a proper review. A proper review is not your opinion. Proper review is, think about the other side. The person has made an argument and they've substantiated their argument. And then you just come back and say, I don't think so. I don't like it. If you don't like it, substantiate your dislike of it. If you're going to make a claim, substantiate that claim. If you are the expert in the area, then you should, if you're going to say, I disagree, it's much stronger to say, I disagree. If you looked at this work, we tried that and it didn't work. Can you clarify? Right? As opposed to, you got something different than me, or, I love this work, but you didn't even see my work, and you should be at least like, this is clearly not good. How can you have missed my work? So there's some incredible nuance that you need to respect there. And I think if you go into the entire process with this attitude of, I'm going to try to help this paper be better for all of us, then I think those things actually come a little more naturally. The last thing I wanted to say was, so Dr. Van Spall spoke about implicit bias. There's also a problem of explicit bias, right? I mean, some of us are perfectly aware of of some of the issues we have with papers that come from certain research groups. We might actually know we don't like the people in that group. I know that I have reviewers who have a very difficult time with papers coming from under-resourced countries, or papers coming from places like China, where they don't understand the system in some of these places, or the challenges that that happen, and they, you know, they just take this attitude of, well, no good work comes from there, so, you know, I'm immediately skeptical of these things. I mean, and that can be an incredibly explicit bias, as opposed to just an implicit one. So I'm inclined to agree. I think when you again, I think you can solve that problem if you approach the whole thing with, I'm going to make this paper better, as opposed to my job is to be a gatekeeper. And I think that very subtle attitude difference really speaks to a lot of the problems the other two speakers raised. So I'm happy to hear rebuttals.
I mean, I'm going to take chair's prerogative here and actually just do a little bit of synopses, just for the purposes of just framing some questions for you in the next round. So, I mean, what I'm hearing is that we should engage in peer review because it's important to make science better. What I'm hearing from all of us is that you're not the only person doing this. This is a multi-source feedback on the paper usually, and that I think reviewers should feel that they should recommend, but know that they're not the final call. And so, similar to the way that right now we're doing, like, you know, assessment for some of our trainees, each individual day is like not a huge deal. We'll have a faculty rate a trainee, and then we pull it all together in a composite committee and actually decide once we have more data. And remember, you only have your perspective, and the systems like this and juries and other phenomena are that multiple people are going to come together to actually have a synergistic kind of point of view. So as someone who does some qualitative research, I would say that just as Dr. Van Spall raised the idea of biases, and Dr. Mercuri is talking about how you kind of have to check yourself when you recommend things, I think that remembering what Dr. Treuger said at the beginning, that the decision, you're basically advising the decision maker to make a good decision. I like to actually put my 2 cents forward and actually declare my biases. So I have worked with this person, I've written 13 papers with them. Do you still want me to review? I'll put that in the confidential comments. I will frame in the top heading. I always have a everyone will know who my reviews are now, because I have standard stock language that says, to situate myself, I am a X person with this kind of expertise and this kind of interest, and I'm going to review this paper from this point of view. And so I do a lot of education work. Sometimes I'm there because I'm the methodology person, and sometimes I'm there because I'm the clinician educator who actually understands how this would be playing out in the real world. And so I actually frame my level of expertise. So I usually have, I'm pretty opinionated, so I usually have something to say about every paper, but I declare my limits. Like if I haven't done fancy analyses that are, you know, multi-level regressions, and I don't feel confident with that, I will tell people I'm reviewing this from the point of view of an educator who has seen this phenomenon at the forefront of things. And so that's kind of like a pro tip I have for everyone. And I think that what I'm hearing from everyone today is that this is hard work, and it's worth doing, because not only do you get a glimpse into help science get better and this lofty kind of enlightenment kind of zone triggers, you also get a chance to learn. You get to learn from the other reviewers, like Dr. Van Spall was saying. You get to learn the inside mechanics that Dr. Treuger and Dr. Mercuri were explaining, and you get to actually just get to see some of the science that's being done and in its rawest form, and watch it grow. I've always been really proud of the papers where I've been the hidden hand that helped them reframe a section or reorganize something. And I think that that's a real privilege to be a part of that process. And now as an editor, I often find that that's a big privilege as well.
Yeah, can I jump in for a second there, Teresa?
Of
So,
course.
I mean, I agree with you in terms of like, I like your view, I guess your perspective of, well, as a qualitative researcher. I mean, if you approach the peer review the same way a qualitative researcher would approach reporting qualitative research, I think that would be very helpful for me as an editor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understanding where the review is coming from.
Yeah.
And you know, and while we're on the topic of qualitative research, I mean, it's not helpful for me, right? When someone says, well, you know, this is qualitative research, therefore it's not useful, right? Because
Yeah.
people have incredibly strong biases in terms of like, only with a randomized control trial can I ever learn anything that's useful in medicine, kind of. And I'm not saying that is an across the board attitude, but I do experience it as an editor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not helpful to me, right? Because it's almost as if I have to kind of dismiss your entire review almost, because you come into it with such a strong opinion. And strong opinions are okay, but like, you know, recognize that the person who sent this paper in worked really hard and really believes in what they're doing. And maybe they're not skilled enough to have something that is actually publishable, or maybe their idea is not important enough. That's okay, right? Maybe that paper never gets published, but recognizing that they worked really hard on this. And, you know, it's, and what I find often is, you know, a lot of the disconnect between reviewers and authors is really just poor communication of ideas. And so it's really important, I think, to look at it saying, you know, what are they trying to tell me? And ask for clarification. I find that as an author, so many times I've looked at peer reviews, and the first time I read them, I said, these guys don't know what they're talking about. But then when I actually sit down the next day to work through it, I'm kind of like, that's my fault. Well, that one's my fault too. Well, you know, I didn't explain this properly.
Yeah.
And if I put myself in their shoes, then maybe I would, you know, so I think it's really important to recognize, again, that collegiality piece and where the other person is coming from.
Yeah.
I
mean, yeah, sorry,
qualify that as, I think that the intervention being tested and the implications of the research on patient care have to be matched with the rigor of the review. So collegiality is great, but if you are reviewing a study that has implications on drug therapies, device interventions, on a potentially serious adverse effect on a patient, it's a life or death matter. And so the work of the authors is less important than making sure that the methods have been conducted well and that the inferences are appropriate, because your review is going to be translated to patient care.
That's a really
very
good point.
different if you are talking about a different type of implication, right? So I would say match the rigor of what you're doing to the implications of what you say. And if it's going to translate to someone's life or death, make sure you're only reviewing studies that you understand and that you have the expertise in. But don't be afraid to say that this study is not publishable in its current form. It's not being less collegial, it's having greater integrity and being mindful of the patients whose lives sit in our hands.
Yeah, that's a really powerful thing to remind people. Thank you so much.
And I completely agree with that. I mean, we shouldn't be publishing bad research. And although I would actually take it one step further, and I would say that the implications of the research, like we shouldn't have lesser standards for things that are not life or death. And, you know, we can, you know, and at the same point, we shouldn't be accepting bad research because it isn't a matter of life and death. So if you're not capable of reviewing a paper and understanding methods, so if you're like, for example, if you're doing a qualitative study and you have a very strong view that nothing can be learned from qualitative research, maybe you're not the appropriate reviewer for that paper. And I think that that's important to understand as well. Just like on the flip side, if you don't really understand the clinical significance of something, I get these requests all the time. I refuse to review anything in cancer research. I'm a methodologist, but I don't understand the clinical space. And I mean, I might, and people might think, well, methods are methods and reviews are reviews. Well, they're not. There's a nuance and subtlety about how these things are applied in different spaces that really, really matter. A cardiologist can catch a person who has no understanding of the cardiology space at all a mile away, even if it's a randomized control trial, right? So it is important. I agree. I think it's okay to say this paper is not good enough. But it's saying that this paper is not good enough after you've already done your due diligence in trying to get the best out of the paper you possibly can. And that's what I mean by the collegiality. But absolutely, I think we let far too much get through with either lazy editing, lazy reviewing, lazy writing, whatever the case may be. And I don't think that that's really helpful for patient care. So I'm right there with you on that one.
Right. And one thing, if I can add, I think something a lot of us have learned this lesson on email, and I've learned this lesson a lot spending time on social media, is that bare text on a page comes off, or can easily come off a lot harsher than we mean it to. And that's basically what comes through the reviews. And months ago that I did, when I was like, look, I've got all these comments, but I want to be clear in my introduction. This is a really good paper that should be accepted. And these are just, some recommendations on things that need to be clarified and that need to, be reported clear. But this is good. But if you just looked at the length of the review and the fact that there's, however many dozen comments, it looks like I'm being hypercritical. And I think having that framing, I think that's why I know I'm a simple emergency doc and I want to, the answer up front. But having in the introduction, this is what I think of the paper. This is why I think it's, relevant. It's not really been done before. It's been done before, but it's worthwhile because of X, Y, Z. These methods are good except for X, Y, Z, but overall still pretty good. And I think this is a worthwhile paper or something along those lines is incredibly helpful because it's so easy to lose the forest for the trees. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in as an editor and looked through a review and be like, I don't need the reviewer to tell me what formatting problem there is. Like, we do that stuff internally. I don't need you to tell me that. And then when I do my reviews, it's so hard not to fall in that same trap. And I put the same thing. We're line 27. You used a comma instead of a semicolon or something stupid. I try not to do that. But like, it's just so easy to get lost in the weeds in this stuff, and trying to, I think, really put what your overall gestalt view is up front for the editor to be really clear can be helpful. And also just remember that I think we all want to be more polite than some of our text can appear to be by itself.
And I think that brings up one other point as an editor that I would like to just take the soapbox and stand on it right now, is that do check the section that you're editing and understand the type of article that you've been asked to review. Because depending on the kinds of journals that you edit for, it might be just the IMRAD kind of like introduction methods, results analysis and discussion, right? Like it's fine, like it's standard. But there are some new formats like a short letter or a brief report that have special criteria. And if you're asking for 17 figures and they're allowed one, then that's something that you should bear in mind. And also sometimes there's restrictions on some subtypes of articles to have only a certain number of citations. So it could be that they're working with some constraints and you should not ask them to violate them unless you're going to bat for them. And so sometimes as a reviewer, because I'm spunky, I will actually get out there and say, I think that the editor should let them violate the rules and go over limit by about 200 words because I think they'll need it and they need 3 more citations. And I'll actually say things like that to the editor in their disclosed comments, just so that they understand that I actually want to, I have the author's back and I think that this needs some more time. So, or needs some more space. So those are a couple of things to bear in mind too. So if you haven't reviewed very much, you should like definitely take a look at the, what Dr. Van Spall was talking about in terms of the reporting guidelines. So you can look at equatornetwork.org is a great repository. If you just go to Google and put Equator Network, you will be able to find a treasure trove of reporting guidelines for any kind of study. Like I'm pretty sure if you have a study design that you aren't sure how to do, you can find a reporting guideline in that database. It's pretty amazing. And so I think that's really important. And I think everything that both Drs. Mercuri and Van Spall have said around the importance of bearing in mind who's at risk and who's going to benefit the most from the work in the end, whether you're like me and do education research, so the learners might be at risk, or learners and patients sometimes as well, or it's that you're going to make a recommendation and everybody's going to take this medication all of a sudden. That's a heavy weight to bear, and something that's really worthwhile bearing in mind when you're writing your reviews. Is you're not just trying to please an editor, you're not just trying to please the authors. You are there to make sure that good work gets out there, and that bad work is something that you pick out so that the editors know when not to publish something.
Yeah, and it's it kind of reminds me of the old biostatistician saying, it's like a doctor can kill a patient, but bad statistics can kill 1,000. There are implications to these things, and I mean, and it's not just a matter, like I was saying, it's not just a matter of life or death for people, or affecting people's education. It can then, some of these papers get in there and they could actually railroad an entire area of research that might lead to something that's very important for advancing a field, because we go down some rabbit hole because we allowed bad work to get into the field, and now we're spending years undoing that. So it is important to, like I said, I mean, you're not a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is the editor, but you need to be doing everything you can to get as much as you can out of that paper until you can realize that paper is just not contributing any knowledge that is actually going to help us advance at all. The other thing too is, in terms of finding editors, finding reviewers, I find a little bit challenging. Sometimes I have to get reviewers in areas that I don't work in. And so it's really helpful for me to reach out to the community that they can give me some advice. And so sometimes when you turn down a review, well, first of all, if you don't want to review something as an editor, I'd like you to turn it down right away. As opposed to just going to an auto decline, because it'll take 2 weeks to get an auto decline, and then I get my message, and then I got to go through my whole process again. But the other thing is, if sometimes it's really helpful if you recommend people. I might not know enough hematologists. I might know one or two hematologists on my reviewer list, and I really rely on them to actually give me a little bit of some networking. So if you can't review, it's really helpful to suggest somebody. So I'll put that bug in everybody's ear as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And increasingly, I think journals are savvy that this is hard work, and increasingly, I haven't had too many journals pay, although there is an interesting journal called the Journal of Medical Internet Research, where you can accrue karma points, which are worth $1 each USD towards their publication fee, because they have an author processing fee on their end. So that's kind of nice, right? So you can peer review or edit your way to a publication, or at least an offset of the cost, which is kind of cool. And there's some innovations out there, but I do think that that's definitely something that editors are increasing savvy to, like setting up awards for reviewers, and being able to incentivize that a little bit, because I think that's nice too. So definitely a pro tip is that it's nice. It's also a great way to talent spot, and your next associate editor is through your reviewer awards and actually doing the analysis of who gives you good reviews. So that's cool. I think that there's been some comments in the play there. Antonia, who's here in the crowd today, has said that when you are submitting, it's equally important to think about the editors and the reviewers and the authorship guidelines, because there's nothing more frustrating to the reviewers and the editors if you don't follow the submission instructions, and then they have to reframe in their head what you didn't do. And so it's true. You as an author, you want to try to remember there are those guidelines. People spend weeks and months sometimes making them. So definitely read them and use them if you can, right? So. All right. Are there any other? We'd love to have questions and have this as a discussion. So if you want to type some things, or if the panelists want to crosstalk, you guys go ahead and debate some points and disagree. We've had some really rigorous discussion.